the not so secret to creating your reality. Of all of the things that you must incorporate when you are setting up your imaginal scene, it's not enough to visualize it. It's not enough just to go into SATs, into your state akin to sleep. You must now that you know about this, use the gates to amplify, to magnetize, to make your wish fulfilled become a reality. Welcome to this week's video on the Inner Work Mastery channel. My name is Fazila Bijou. This week, we're going to be diving into the not so secret of manifestation and reality creation. You may have heard of it, but it's so simple that it is overlooked quite often. Have you ever wished to unlocking the keys to the power of your imagination? Have you ever wished for the keys to unlocking the power of imagination? I've heard this question and I've been asked it numerous times. What is the best technique for manifestation? And please tell me which one works best. When I was preparing for this week's case studies, I actually came across what could be the true secret of learning how to manifest and create your reality. So this is important, for me to highlight and talk to you about this today, because it's not just a technique. This is a process. And it's what Neville speaks about all the time in his lectures and his books. It's about the tones of reality. Now, if you don't understand what he was referring to in terms of tones of reality, you're going to struggle with accessing the power of your imagination. You're going to struggle in terms of what he has spoken about quite often is feeling is the secret. In order to get into the real feeling, you must be able to have your imaginal scene take on the tones of reality. And in order for that scene to take on the tones of reality, you must have that scene pass through the 4 gates. Now, you've got to enter the 4 gates of your senses. Can you answer this? Do you enter the gates of your imagination? Do you know how to do that? So this week I have 2 case studies where the 2 imaginists have applied the use of the different gates in terms of making their imagination take on the tones of reality. It would be so easy to miss this if you were just listening or reading this particular chapter in The Law and the Promise, which is chapter 6 called Visionary Fancy. You can please go ahead and read it if you'd like to before you watch this video, or as you watch this video, see if you can start to pick out what is it that each of these individuals are doing in terms of making their imagination real. As I go through each of the slides, I will point out certain things that these individuals have applied and done so that you can become aware that they are indeed taking their imagination through these different gates. So when you watch this video, I suggest you take some notes and you make sure that you can then prepare a checklist for what you should be including to improve how you set up your imaginal scene. And also when you go into the state akin to sleep or SATs, when you go into bring about your imaginal scene, to bring your desire into your mind's eye, you must take that imaginal scene through these different gates. This is the not so secret to creating your reality. Now, this might very well be the secret that could unlock your greatest desires in terms of invoking the tones of reality in your imagination. Because once you can invoke and bring about that level of reality to your imaginal scene, your subconscious mind accepts it and does not see it as being untrue, even if it has not shown up in your reality yet. And that is what we are doing, is your imagination must direct your attention. Energy flows where attention goes. So you're really commanding the resource of energy. So you are becoming the vibrational resonance in terms of your manifestation. Catherine Ponder talks about radiating your desire into physical reality, which means that and without a doubt, you believe that your desire, your dream is true. And there is nothing then that can stop that dream from becoming a reality when you have seen it and you feel it as real. Neville Goddard regularly advised adding the tones of reality to our visualizations and our imaginations. But what are the tones of reality? As I said, it's a not so secret of how to create your reality. When you understand what he meant in terms of the tones of reality, you can unlock the power of imagination. Neville taught that these tones of reality can enter through the gates of our senses. And the gates of our senses are really your touch, sight, sound, taste. Do you incorporate these senses into your imagining? So you must become so totally possessed by your dream that it takes on this very, very real and lifelike feeling because your senses are now involved. When you have an intense wish, you must become it. And to become it, you must feel it, you must see it, you must hear it, and you must also taste it. If there's a taste involved, it'll make it that much stronger for you. And also, the one sense that will actually open up your consciousness is something that we'll touch on, but not for today. When you intensely have a visualization of your desire and you invoke the tones of reality and you take your desire through the different gates, which we'll be talking about. I'll be touching on them very briefly today and specifically focus on the two that come up in these case studies. The Western Gate of Touch, the very important one, because once you get to touch something and make it real in your scene, you open up your consciousness, your subconsciousness to accepting it as real. The Southern Gate of Sight, the Eastern Gate of Scent or Smell, and then the Northern Gate of Sound. If you can achieve if you can invoke the tones of reality through these gates of touch, sight, scent, or smell, and sound, you will bring your manifestation into being. In today's case study, we're going to deal with the Northern Gate of Sound, and then in the second one, we're also going to bring in the Southern Gate of Sight. So let's see how both these individuals actually created and invoked the tones of reality in their imaginal scenes. The first case study is Mrs. G.R. Here's what she writes into Neville about. She says, some time ago, we advertised our home for sale, and the sale was necessary because they wanted to buy a larger property on which they had placed a deposit. They had several people who were interested in buying their home, but they were obliged to let them know that they would only sell their home. They would not accept any offer until they learned that the other deal had gone through. At this time, a broker called, really begged them to allow him to show the home to a client of his who was eager for that location and who wanted to even pay more than they were asking. When they explained the situation to the broker, that it was dependent on the other deal going through, he said they didn't mind waiting. The broker asked them to sign a piece of paper, which he said was not binding in any way, and that it would just give him first chance at the sale if the other deal went through. They find out later that the paper that they signed under California real estate law could not have been more binding. Contact the real estate broker and they let him know that the deal has fallen through. His verbal response was, well, just forget it. Thinking that all was well, 2 weeks later, they find out that he had gone ahead and filed a suit against them for $1,500 commission. The trial date was set and they asked for a jury trial. So their attorney assured them he would do everything that he could, but he did say the law on that particular point was so stringent, he did not see any possibility of them winning the case. So when the time came for the trial, Mrs. G.R.'s husband was in hospital and he couldn't appear with her in their defense either. She says, I had no witnesses. The broker turned up with 3 attorneys and they had a number of witnesses in court against us. And at this point, her attorney tells her that they had not the slightest chance to win. Now, looking at all of this, when it comes to legal matters, most people, the majority of people, are actually quite stressed out, and they tend to get very stressed, and they tend to believe in the physical evidence that appears to them. What happens is then their inner speech and their emotional state believes in the finality of the situation. They can become desperate, depressed about what they're looking at in their physical reality. And this is what Mrs. GR did. She says, I turned to my imagination. I completely disregarded all that had been said by the attorneys, the witnesses, and the judge, who seemed to be in favor of the plaintiff. And I only thought of the words I wanted to hear. What would those words be? She says, I listened intently. I closed my mind's ear to everything said in the courtroom, and I heard only these words: we find the defendant not guilty. And here's the important thing I must stress is she says, I listened until I knew it was true. Now that is taking it through the northern gate of sound. So then the jury goes away to deliberate from noon until 4:30 that afternoon. And during those hours, she sat in the courtroom and she heard those words over and over again in her imagination. And she kept hearing that we find the defendant not guilty. We find the defendant not guilty. Because what you choose to hear determines your destiny. When you go through the Northern Gate, you choose what you hear, but you also choose how you're going to hear it. And how you're going to hear it will be with the joy, relief, as well, in terms of being told that you've won your case. So we find the defendant not guilty. How would you be feeling? Would you have a family member with you? Would you have a friend along with you? Would you be sitting back in your chair and take a sigh of relief to hear the foreman say, we find the defendant not guilty? When the jurors returned, the judge asked the foreman to stand up and give the verdict. The foreman said, we find the defendant not guilty. That is what Mrs. GR did. She went into her imaginal space, into that into the scene in her mind's eye, but she heard the words over and over again until it became natural for her to believe it. And that's what feeling is. You consent and you accept and you have faith that the unseen, what you haven't seen in your reality yet, is already yours. Answer this question then. If there were dreams to sell, what would you buy? Would you not buy your wish fulfilled? Our dreams are without price and without money. Now, Mrs. GR locked up the jury in her imagination, and she only heard what she wanted to hear. She called a unanimous verdict on her behalf by believing and having faith that she would hear the foreman pronounce the verdict as the defendant is not guilty. So change the image and you change the fact. So nothing is so fatal as conformity. So it is only final when you consent and accept it. It is only final when you decide that that is your reality. And this is what Neville is saying. We must not allow ourselves to be bound up, encircled by what we think is fixed in reality. It isn't. You change the image and you change the fact. That is revision. Mrs. GR, in this previous case study, decided to use the northern gate of sound to invoke and bring in the tone of reality to her imaginal act. Now we're going to see Mrs. RO employ the southern gate, art of seeing and feeling to create her vision in her imagination. Mrs. RO says, a year ago, I took my children to Europe, leaving a furnished apartment in the care of my maid. When I returned a few months later to the United States, I found my maid and all my furniture gone. The apartment superintendent said that the maid had told them my furniture had to be moved by my request. Now, at that point, there was nothing she could do, and she decided to take her children and move to a hotel. Now, of course, she says, I reported the incident to the police and I also brought private detectives in. And she said both the police and the private detectives investigated every moving company and every storage warehouse in New York City, but they could not find anything that could trace they could not find any trace of her furniture nor of her maid. She says, having exhausted all outside sources, so she went to the police and private investigators, she said, I remembered your teaching and I decided I would try using my imagination in this matter. Now, while she was sitting in her hotel room, she closes her eyes and she imagines herself surrounded by everything familiar in her apartment. She knows what it's like to be sitting in her favorite chair and to have her personal furnishings around her. She said, I also looked across the living room at the piano on which I kept pictures of my children. And I would continue to stare at my piano until the entire room became vividly clear to me. I could see my children's pictures and actually feel the upholstery of the chair in which, in my imagination, I sat. Now, very important, something that you could miss. I mentioned the southern gate was sight. Now, the western gate of touch, when you can bring touch in to your imaginal scene, it becomes something that opens up your subconscious. And when you truly can feel something in your imaginal scene, for example, in your scene, you pick up your phone and you can feel the weight, your subconscious mind accepts that as being true. And therefore, there is no barrier, and it does not distinguish that your imaginal scene has not yet taken place in your reality. It treats it like it would your memories. It is a given to your subconscious mind when you can bring in the tone of reality through these different gates. She says, the next day, as I came out of the bank and I was walking in the direction of my vacant apartment instead of my hotel, when I reached the corner, I discovered my mistake. And as I was about to turn around, my attention was drawn to a very familiar pair of ankles. Yes, the ankles belonged to my maid. I walked up to her and I took hold of her arm. She was quite frightened, but I assured her all I wanted from her was my furniture. I called a taxi and she took me to the place where her friends had stored my furnishings. Now, in one day, my imagination had found what an entire big city police force and private investigators could not find in weeks. R.O. And that's the thing that you're looking at here is Mrs. R.O. went into the imaginal space and she brought in the tones of reality into her imagination. She fused it in to such a point that she could see the pictures of her children on the piano. That was the southern gate. She could feel the upholstery of her favorite chair as she was sitting in it. As she imagined herself sitting in her hotel room, she imagined herself sitting in her favorite chair in her apartment. And she brought in the western gate. Now, it's good to be able to combine at least two gates, because you are now solidifying and you are confirming to your subconscious mind that your imaginal scene is real. Here's what Neville says we should do. First is you predetermined. What do you want to hear? What do you want to see? What do you want to feel? We take the northern gate as the first example. So when you sit down and you predetermine what you want to hear and you listen until you hear it and you refuse to hear anything other than that, then you are using the one power in the world that awakens a man, and you are using your lovely imagination, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory. So just so there's no mistake, Christ in you is your wonderful imagination. It is your I am. It is God in you. It is you using this gift of mind in terms of making your imaginal scene, making your desires, your wish fulfilled come true. When you predetermine what you want to hear, you mustn't just hear it. You must also feel the feeling it will give you. What would you hear? How would you feel about it? For example, when you hear Mrs. GR, who was in court, she heard, we find the defendant not guilty. Wouldn't you feel relief? Wouldn't you feel joy that you've won this case? So not only do you hear what you want to hear, but you must also feel what you would feel when you hear that. In the case of Mrs. R.O., she saw her apartment, she saw her furnishings, she saw the pictures of her kids on the piano, and she felt herself sitting in her favorite chair. She could feel the texture of the upholstery. Construct your scene and now bring it in from the perspective of, when I hear this, how would I feel? When I see this, what would I feel? And so in that way, you are now making your imaginal scene even more real. You are now layering the dynamics, you are layering the senses into your scene, and you are infusing and invoking it into reality. You must continue to imagine your desire is already accomplished. And when your objective is realized, when your wish is fulfilled, you know you will have obtained the proof that your imagination truly works. Now, very importantly, do not delay. You will see in both the case studies, both women immediately went about choosing to hear and feel and see what they wanted to hear, feel, and see. You do it immediately. You don't sit in the feeling of failure. You don't sit in the feeling of being disappointed, etc. You must watch what you are thinking during the course of your day. Make sure your inner speech does not go into the negative. Make sure your inner speech, your inner talk doesn't tell you, I can't win this, or I'll never find my possessions, etc. And Neville says, a revision is the first act of cure or correction. So if you've gotten disappointing news, correct it. Do not wait until the end of the day to revise. Do it immediately. If you hear words that you did not wish to hear, if you are having thoughts that are not in alignment with what you desire, change it, revise it. Be sure not to be caught up in what 3D is showing you. 3D may say, my furniture has been stolen, or 3D may say, my furniture has been stolen, or or the lawsuit is real. You are to ensure that you go into the imaginal space and you bring in these gates of your senses. And with each sense, you make your imagination become your reality. Neville says this, your imaginary sight is not observing. Your imaginary sight, your imaginary hearing is you hear it, you see it, you taste it, you touch it. And that's what you must do. In the scenes, these two, both the women show us, they were participating. The one was sitting in the courtroom, the other one was sitting in her home again, but everything was restored. So you do not do this in third person. You are always going to do this in the first person. There is a case for when you do this in the third person, but that's a topic for another video. Now, Neville says the difference between feeling yourself in action here and now and visualizing yourself in action is the difference between you seeing yourself on screen, like as though you were watching a movie, or you are the one that is in the movie and you are acting out the scene. So Neville says this, the difference between feeling yourself in action here and now and visualizing yourself in action as though you were on a motion picture screen is the difference between success and failure. This difference will be appreciated if you will now visualize yourself, your body, climbing a ladder. And then with your eyelids closed, you imagine that a ladder is in front of you and you feel yourself actually climbing it. That's the difference when you imagine your scenes. You are not watching this on a screen, you are actively participating. If you are seeing yourself from a third-person perspective, that's observation. You do not do that. You must be actively participating in the scene. And there we have it. So please leave your comments in the section below and let me know if you got some value out of understanding what the gates are. Did you understand now how important it is in terms of the 4 gates and bringing through and invoking the tones of reality? So did you get value out of this week's video? Do you understand how important it is now to invoke your imagination with the tones of reality, to bring in your senses and have your imaginal scene go through these different gates? Your imaginal scene, what am I hearing? What am I tasting? What am I smelling? What am I touching? When you can move through each of these, you are going to make your imaginal scenes that much more powerful. And it will make the difference between you just seeing and hearing to you totally feeling it and experiencing in imagination your wish and your desire has been fulfilled. So I hope you went through this week's video and you've taken some notes so that you can start to build a tick list of all of the things that you must incorporate when you are setting up your imaginal scene. It's not enough to visualize it. It's not enough just to go into SATs, into your static into sleep. You must now that you know about this, use the gates to amplify, to magnetize, make your wish fulfilled become a reality. So please be sure to like, to share, to subscribe, help me grow the channel, and I will see you in the next video, and I'll talk about the other gates as we go through the case studies that come up. So thank you and bye for now.